Part of this series includes the spiritual exercise for all of us to name something that we'd like to know the truth about. On one of the last pages in the worship guide, there's a sheet with some questions on it, which you might find helpful in discerning and deciding. Once you've decided what you like to learn the truth about, it does require a commitment. Sometimes it takes a lot of effort to draw the truth out. It doesn't always just emerge or unfold. During the first week of this series, I made a commitment to learning the truth about Aramaic tradition, Aramaic cultures, because those are the ways of Jesus. I've also been very curious about Aramaic understandings of familiar Bible stories, such as the one we are sharing today, the feeding of the 5,000. And while this week's commentary, this week's Aramaic perspective was interesting, it was the work of Alan Dwight Callahan, which really caught my attention. The Aramaic scholars wrote about the need for travelers to carry food with them because back in the day when when the teachings of Jesus were emerging, there was no such thing as a truck stop and there weren't McDonald's. So it was necessary for people to bring food with them. The Aramaic scholars also pointed out that travelers were much more willing to share their food on the way back when the journey was ending than they were to share at the very beginning. And all of that makes sense. While the Aramaic scholars were focused on food, Callahan was focused on the place. Callahan focused on the exact location where today's story about the feeding of the 5,000, the sharing of bread and fish, took place. And before we get into those details, we need to welcome Leo to worship. Before we get into those details about the location, it's important that we keep in mind the broader context of this story. The Gospel of John is focused on the way that Jesus reveals the kingdom. John's Gospel has Jesus showing the way that the God of heaven, gets things done. So the first thing is, people are following Jesus because they see these signs which point to the ways of God, signs that are filled with the promise, potential, and the hints that something really miraculous is going on. In this particular story, the people were following Jesus because he had been healing people. So when Jesus crosses over to the other side, the people are curious about how Jesus does this heal. So they cross to the other side as well.